Welcome, everyone, to the Predictive Playbook. This is a special edition. On this episode, I'm going to demonstrate on a high-level overview on how to use some advanced metrics, specifically the yards per point that you hear me mention on the Manny's Pub Show and several other of the free pick shows. So we all agreed that it would be the right time to show how I use it. And keep in mind, it's only one of many of the what you would call the advanced metrics that are applied then to the machine learning models that give me the predictions. And I might say right now the difference between deep learning and machine learning and all these big fancy words that people like to say, and most of them don't know what they are, is that if you want to get a specific target, such as the Patriots will score 30 points exact, or you want to see what the expectation is from the model of what they will score, then if you want an exact number, that would be deep learning. Machine learning would be a range of scoring from, say, what's the probability that the Patriots score 27 to 31 points this coming week against that opponent. So I just wanted to clarify the difference of the two. It annoys me sometimes when I hear corporate people talking about machine learning and deep learning like they actually do it on a daily basis. So I just wanted to clarify, just so you guys know what the difference is. And they're both subsets of artificial intelligence, and they've been around since really the 1950s. They're made out to be this new rocket science technology, and it isn't. There's some new stuff, of course, but some of these other techniques like Gaussian probabilities that I use were developed in the 1950s and since enhanced and augmented, but they started a long, long time ago, 7 decades. So anyway, let's get to yards per point here. And what we're going to be looking at is the Big Ten, and we have basically 5 games taking place this week with 4 other teams on byes. And yards per point, what does it mean? Why would you use it? Yards per point can be used using passing yards. It can be used rushing yards and total yards minus sacking yards. That would be the net. So what it measures is the efficiency of a defense or an offense. And at this point of the season, some of the teams have played 7 games, some have played 6. The sample size is large enough now where we can get some really good value and then develop a 3-game moving average of the most recent 3 games and compare it to the season. And in so doing, you can see whether a team is regressing or whether they're actually getting better week by week. And you'll see that certainly in the Ohio State Indiana game that I'll break down a little bit later in the show here. So yards per point, you take yards divided by points, and that's essentially it. And you do it for the whole entire season, and then you do it week by week. In other words, game by game. And a 3-day moving average is what I use in futures trading, but a 3-game moving average is exactly the same thing. So how's this team done over the last 3 games in that ratio of yards per point? In offense, the lower the number, the lower the ratio, the better the offense. So in our case here in the Big Ten, Iowa is purely on yards per point is ranked number 1 in the Big Ten at 11.11 yards per point. So that means that their offense needs only 11.1 yards on average to put up 1 point on the scoreboard. So the next most efficient team is Michigan, 11.44, and then Ohio State at 11.6. Then we have Michigan State, 13.2. And I'm not going to read them all off to you because you can see on the graphic where they rank. So you can see that Wisconsin is dead last, and they are polar opposite to Iowa in many ways. And the most glaring example is that Iowa, prior to the Penn State game, averaged their starting drive on the opponent's 39-yard line, and that was through 5 games. So how do you then compare against a Wisconsin who against Penn State in game 1 of the Big Ten Conference, drove the ball, and then turned it over in the red zone, threw an interception in the end zone, So that's what I'm going to adjust for. And there's formulas and stuff that are pretty common among data scientists like myself that help you do that. So then what happens is you have a number then that's based on strength of schedule and field position. In other words, average starting drive. Where did it happen? Where's the average? How far does a team have to go to score a field goal? How far does a team average distance to score a touchdown or just score points? And of course, you factor out safeties. You do include missed field goals because those are failures. And I also go as far as to differentiate between red zone failures and outside the red zone failures. And red zone success versus red zone failure. Inside the 5-yard line is part of the metrics that go into this. So what we have then, as you can see on the graphic, is the offensive ranks change a little bit. Ohio State, even though they're 11.6 and ranked third in the Big Ten, when you adjust to a schedule and adjust for all the metrics I just mentioned, they're actually number one, and very, very efficient when you account for all these other factors that are very, very real in a game. Illinois becomes worse, and they take on Penn State this weekend, and Illinois is the only team in the Big Ten that is not an average football team based on the 130 teams in Division I. Just slightly below an average team. The rest of the Big Ten, the rest of the 13 teams other than Illinois, who makes 14 for the conference, they're all at or above an average Division I football team with the obvious names: Michigan, Ohio State, Iowa, and Penn State. Much, much stronger than the average Division I football team. And after all, we have 6 of the 14 teams ranked in this week's poll. The polls don't mean anything, folks, because there's no way that 4 teams from the Eastern Division of the Big Ten that are currently in the top 10 are going to remain there because they have to play each other. Next week, Penn State goes to Columbus, Ohio to take on Ohio State. Somebody's going to win that game, and the loser's probably going to drop out of the top 10. So you can see that the polls are very, they can be very misleading, and it's fun to talk about, and it's even more fun to talk about which teams are going to advance, which teams are going to fall out. And that's kind of what it is. It's the discussion. But there's no use for rank at all in my handicapping. So we went over the offensive yards per point, and the thing you need to remember is that the lower the number, the better and more efficient the offense is. So we go to defense here, and you can see on this graphic, the numbers are vastly higher. Okay, well, the reason is that a defense wants to force an opponent to gain as many yards as possible to put up that 1 point on the board based on this metric. So the higher the number, the more stout the defense is. And Penn State comes in number 1 in the Big Ten, and I might add number 1 nationally. And on many different levels here, which I won't go into on this show. I might do it on Mandy's Pub later on, or another one of our college free pick shows with Dr. Chuck and the rest of the gang. Penn State, in my opinion, is as ferocious as the Georgia Bulldogs. Georgia's number 1 nationally across the board, but Penn State is right there. So I think the Penn State story is, Clifford, they need Clifford to play quarterback. He has the left collarbone is injured. Been talked that he's been throwing the ball, doing some drills, not all, with the first unit. But they need him, obviously, to get enough points on the board and exceed what the defense can do. And I do think this week the defense will just squash Illinois. And I wouldn't be surprised if Illinois does not score, to be perfectly honest with you. So on defense, the higher the number, which you can see here, 22.6 for Penn State. But then adjusted for all the metrics I mentioned that are game factors, it goes up to 24.3. And that's pretty damn good. at historically over many seasons. I've been doing this for 27 years, so rarely do I see any numbers get above 25. Georgia is one of them, and does that mean Georgia's going to regress or Penn State's defense is going to regress? Purdue's defense is definitely good based on these numbers. And I don't see any sign of a regression. And you're going to see where Purdue and Wisconsin are playing this week and how these metrics can really set the stage for potential upsets or blowouts. So you can see the ranking here again. Wisconsin comes in pretty weak here, and that's only because they've allowed the other team to have fantastic field position. They make far too many mistakes to date, and that's why that is so low. It goes up because of what I just said, those game factors that they are not executing well on, including penalty yards, and that's a factor too. So let's see, what else can I show you here? These are the total differentials, and Penn State ranks second behind Georgia at plus 10. That means that they're, if you subtract the defense yards per point from the offensive yards per point, it equals 10. And that's a very, very good number. It pales in comparison to number one, though, Georgia, which is at 20. And that is just ridiculous. No Alabama team has ever reached 20, or Clemson team, or any of the recent champions of the last 10 years has reached 20 in week 8 or later of the regular season. And I do not think Georgia is going to be in a position to regress. That number might come down. It might come down to 15 or 16, but that doesn't mean they're going to lay an egg and lose to somebody here. That team is very, very strong and probably stronger than I even realized a couple weeks ago. So let's get to the games here. And we'll just quickly run through the ones that really do matter here. Like Minnesota and Maryland, I don't have anything on there. Let's start with Illinois versus number 7 Penn State. The end result of the model, and this is only one of 5 models I run. So this is an attempt to come up with a quotient, and not necessarily a betting line, but it kind of comes out that way. And it's not a power rating. This is pretty complicated stuff, if I dare say so. So Illinois at number 7 Penn State. Penn State, based on the numbers and the metrics, is favored by 26.5. Okay, so the market's at 23.5, and that doesn't necessarily imply that there's 3 points in value, because we have to look at other things. We have to look at the matchups. Is Clifford playing? They have Ohio State coming up. And you may have heard me say that one of the bets I like this weekend quite a bit is taking Penn State first half. And if that wins, then I'll be tweeting and considering taking Illinois in-game second half before the second half kickoff. Because I do believe that if they get up, say 28-3, 21-0, maybe, I guess it would have to be a little bit more than that. But if they get up more than 4 or more scores, I think you'll see Coach Franklin take the starters out, and most notably Clifford with his injury. That is if he plays. And conversely, even if no matter who's under center, Penn State will be able to run the ball and run the ball a lot. So there won't be any pressure on the backup to make plays with his arm. I'm sure they're going to throw the ball once in a while, but the advantages on the offensive line for Penn State are enormous in this matchup. So Illinois right now is regressing on a total differential. So if you, like I said, you take the offensive one subtracted from the defensive metric, and the higher, more positive it is, that this means it's a much, much better team on both sides of the ball. So I already mentioned that Penn State has a 10 quotient. It compares to Illinois, who is a minus 0.3. Over the last 3 games, it's minus 3 and ranks 84th nationally. That's against number 2 nationally, Penn State. So you can see that there's just right then and there, very quickly, you can see that it is a vast difference between the two programs, and probably a lot more than 23 points as the betting market suggests. Maryland, Minnesota, as I said, I didn't have anything come up for that. Northwestern versus number 6 Michigan. Northwestern was one of the picks on the college football show. And the metrics support it. And this is a play that I probably go to the window on, as well as that first half Penn State game. And you have a situation here where Michigan is favored by 24 points over Northwestern. They're ranked number 6. But the models are saying there's about 7.5 points of value here taking Northwestern. And I know it's hard to imagine that Northwestern would be able to compete for 4 quarters and possibly lose by 10 or fewer, but I think that's what's going to happen. 87th is Northwestern with a minus 1.6 differential. They're minus 0.6 last 3, and that's better. It's less negative. And 12.6 in that last game, which was by far their best game of the season. So you have a team that has really been struggling on both sides of the ball, suddenly finding some magic here and getting some rhythm. And they're going to want to play well against Michigan and do everything in their power to try to upset them. They're a conference foe. What else are they going to do? Just go in there and get blown out 52-0? I don't think so, not with that head coach. Michigan has been regressing a little bit here. So we have a little bit of progression and a little bit of regression here. Michigan, 8.5 yards per point differential between defense and offense. And over the last 3, it's come down to 4.6. And the last game was only 0.5. Those are the situations I look for. And again, this is just one of many of the mathematical models and the results of them that I use. Let's look at Ohio State at Indiana. Ohio State minus 26.5 is where fair market value would be based on my work from this. The market's at minus 21, so there is significant upside on Ohio State. And although the public is enamored with Ohio State and their recent performance, they're not anywhere close to reaching a pinnacle and being prone to a regression type of situation. Maybe that'll happen next week when they take on Penn State. We'll have to wait and see. But Ohio State is on one of those. They just have that look of a champion type team again. They lose one, it wakes up the giant, and then they just rip the doors off of everybody the rest of the way. I do have a concern with their defense. Their secondary is not all that good. It's below average, especially way below average, especially with the elite teams. And they're vulnerable to crossing routes in the vertical game. And if any team can exploit that, they're going to be able to keep in stride with that offense. And that's their Achilles heel right now. Secondary is very, very vulnerable. They can't bring the safeties up to the line of scrimmage to stop the run, because then that leaves these guys on islands in man coverage. And against the top 5 teams in the nation, that's going to be a difficult task. However, in this game, it looks like the bet would be to take Ohio State. They're 11th in yards per point differential, 7.3. And the last 3 has gone up, 14.6 yards per point differential. And the last game was 10.6. Again, anything double digits on a 3-game average or the last game is phenomenal. And I do think that that the play here would be to get on Ohio State. I don't know if it's going to make my card, but it's certainly on the radar. Indiana has a minus 10 yards per point differential. The last 3 is minus 8. A little bit better, right? But the last game, minus 9.4 again. And those are not good numbers. On both sides of the ball, they are not playing anywhere close to what they did last year. Wisconsin versus Purdue. So it looks quite possible here that the right team is favored. As good as Purdue played against Iowa, and we all had questions about Iowa, Wisconsin looks like they're in position here to knock Purdue off. and they're a 3.5-point favorite right now. The Purdue offense is 17.9, ranks 111th, 24.6 the last three, and 19.3 the last game. So that's offensive yards per point, and that's not good. You want that number down closer to 10 than 20. And their 3-game average right now is 24.6, despite the win over Iowa. Wisconsin is 18.7 on the offensive end, 16.6, it's coming down, and 15 in their last game. So there's a trend where this offense is finally starting to get in a positive direction. I know it hasn't looked pretty at all, but against Purdue, and even though Purdue has a vastly underrated defense, in my opinion, I think Wisconsin will finally get the act together here on the road and come away with a win. Wisconsin's differential is -7 for the season, and that's the yards per point differential. Over the last three, they've averaged -2.7, still negative, but it's a hell of a lot better than -7. And they rank 122 out of 130 teams in Division I football at -7. So again, this is a team that was supposed to be, challenging for the Big Ten championship. I guess it was set up, that Ohio State and them would be squared off in the conference championship game. That's not going to happen. But don't be surprised if Wisconsin starts putting on some points on the scoreboard and against the teams that match up well. And I think they do match up well against Purdue. They could put up a surprising amount of points. That also lends itself to considering the over when in Wisconsin games down the stretch here. And that's just a starting point. But I do think Wisconsin's offense is undervalued a lot by the marketplace. And there's reason to believe now, just based on what I just showed you, that they will play much, much better offensively against Purdue and the next several opponents than they have in the first 7 weeks of the season. So I hope that explained yards per point there. I appreciate you listening to me break down all these games in the Big Ten. And I even more appreciate the fact that the college football and NFL shows on SportsMemo TV are really gathering up steam. We had the one show that was 3,500 views, and it's still going, and that's just phenomenal in my eyes. I know there's shows out there that get 50,000 views. The Bet on It show gets 45,000, without even having to wake up the next day, kind of thing. And that's our goal. Our goal is to keep going in that direction, just like they started out, and see if we can't grow this thing exponentially. So we appreciate you watching this show. If you have any questions, just send it to me, direct message on Twitter, or in the comments section of this video. And on behalf of myself and WagerTalk.com, SportsMemo.com, and the Predictive Playbook, may all the wins keep being yours. Thank you for watching.